Hello, and welcome to Pivotal Moments HQ, a podcast sharing, exploring, and celebrating stories of change through mindset and wellness and their impact on relationships. We are all agents of change and have the power to pivot at any point, at any time. I'm your host, Melissa Robena, along with my co-host, Siria Gutierrez. On this episode, we continue our series on resistance and discuss lack of trust and mistrust as a reason people resist change. We talk about lack of trust in organizations and in one's own skill sets.
So on this episode, we continue our series on the resistance to change, and we will be discussing mistrust as one of those reasons.
Why do you feel that mistrust is a resistance to change?
I think you do need to be in a trusting place to feel like you can start maybe setting boundaries, pushing yourself a little bit. And if you are not in a place that you can do that, if there's no, I almost feel like mistrust equates to safety somehow. And that if you're not feeling like you're in a safe place, why would you do any of these things? If you're mistrusting of the person or the organization that you're at, why would you be vulnerable? Why would you give them any of yourself other than the bare minimum? Going above and beyond makes no sense in that situation. What do you think?
I think psychological safety is a huge component. I see this all the time in organizational development when I go into a consulting project. They're so resistant to change because, and it's oftentimes that either they don't trust the process, but more than that is they don't trust leadership. Maybe a new company has been acquired by another organization and there's already a lot of uncertainty surrounding their future. Now, John Smith is coming in and trying to disseminate this information. It's I don't know you from Adam. So why am I going to get behind this new leadership? So there's this sense of uncertainty and lack of trust.
I kind of feel like this falls into those soft skills that people talk about. Trying to build rapport with your team, whatever, that doesn't matter. It's well, actually it does. It's one of those soft skills that, because again, with your example, right? If John goes in there, hasn't had any kind of trust or rapport built with the people that he's supposed to be leading or, supposed to be, helping through this transition, this merger or whatever, how are you going to do that if there's no trust? So my question for you though is, does trust do you automatically trust people or do they have to earn your trust?
Oh, definitely you have to earn my trust. I feel like I know you already probably knew the answer to that, and I feel our listeners should probably know the answer to that. Yeah, no, I definitely trust is something that's earned and not given. So I think, I've seen firsthand that, lack of trust shows itself either individually or in an organization as frustration, suspicion, or there's anxiety surrounding this change. And, I know that I can speak to a lot of in an organizational setting, but when I was thinking about lack of trust, that imposter syndrome kind of surfaced because that kind of makes me think that we mistrust or lack trust of our skill sets.
Okay, so just turning it to the self. So,
well, especially if we're talking resistance to change.
Right. So if you've got that resistance to change and we're doing it in the context of ourselves, right? Yeah. If you mistrust whether or not you could do something, I feel like that's just another way for saying fear.
Mm-hmm. Well, we did talk about fear in a previous episode. So, I think that there's going to be a lot of overlap in this series because we don't just feel one emotion. We can feel multiple emotions at the same time, and one emotion might feed the other.
So have there been periods of time where you have felt mistrust in your own abilities?
Oh, absolutely. All the time. Especially anytime I'm trying something new. We talk about podcasting. Can I just tell you how fearful I was getting behind this mic? Now you have to pry it from my cold, dead fingers.
Basically.
But I think anytime you try something new, there's that hesitancy. Is what I'm going to be doing going to be good enough? Are people going to appreciate it, enjoy it? And so there's always that trusting your skill sets.
Well, I'm hearing a little bit of that, but I'm also hearing, caring about the results. But it's more, okay, so you mistrusted that you could like operate a mic or?
No, mistrust that I can carry a conversation. Mistrust that the content that I'm going to be providing is of value to people.
Got it.
So that's what I mean by that.
Yeah. Okay. So that makes sense. So it's just, yeah, it's, it's this fierce courage kind of concept of just being bold, doing the thing, and just showing up. And in that, you need to have trust that you'll figure it out, right? As you keep going forward. I'm trying to think of times that I've mistrusted things.
Well, I can kind of think of one for you.
Oh,
And
okay.
recently. So in the firm that shall not be named, there was a lot of transition going on within the organization, specifically changing the organizational chart and how things operated, moving from all people being employees to independent contractors. That's a huge change. How was that received within the organization?
I would say the way it was received was different depending on how it impacted you, because it didn't happen to everybody. It just happened to a certain select class of what would have been employees, and probably the most crucial for a law firm because it was the attorneys.
Yeah.
So with them, I can't really say, because there wasn't a discussion that happened with the colleagues of like, hey, what are you going to do? Or, what are your thoughts on this? Like it was one of those things where it was presented in a way that I think was meant to divide and conquer. And so each individual was met with separately. Everything was done, which you would have needed to do anyways. But perhaps the overall announcement of it would have had more transparency. And then with the support staff, they didn't know what was going on with any of the changes. And so that was just kind of the MO of this organization. So it's like, okay, I think it was received like with most things, like, oh, okay, we're going to do this now. But also knowing that some people in the organization had zero clue what was going on, and other people knew way more information, which I guess would happen. But if you're trying to say, oh, we operate on transparency and, we're all trying to make sure everybody knows everything, so that way you have a cohesive organization of some kind. Yeah, that didn't happen.
But I mean, specifically though, you went from kind of knowing where you sat in your organization to there's a lot of uncertainty, like what the fuck is going on. How did you feel at that time? Was there a dissolution of this trust that you may have had for leadership within the organization?
I think for me, it came at a time where I already didn't trust them. So it was just like, oh, that's interesting. All right, now we're going to do this. And so I think that had been brewing for a bit because of other actions that had happened beforehand. And so, trust, if we're going to talk about it being on a continuum of some kind, like, yeah, it starts off one way, and then people may do something and you may increase the trust, or they may do something that pisses you off and that reduces the trust. And so you go back and forth. And so I was at a place where I fully trusted the organization when I got there. And I think that's true for probably every single place I've been in, because it's like you want to be there, right? Like there was something exciting about it, something that drew you in, and you're just like, yeah, okay, like this is great. And I don't think anybody goes into a place thinking like, oh, I'm going to leave here in like 6 months, or no, you want to try to make the best of it, right? Unless it's, something that you took totally just out of desperation maybe, or circumstance that required you to do something where you're like, okay, this is my stepping stone. I'm not here. I'm not going to get comfortable. I'm not going to put anything up in my cubicle, kind of a thing. But for me, like, at least since I've became, a grown up, I'm doing that in quotes because I don't really think I am. I'm not mature enough for many, many things. So, just being excited about the opportunities. And then as the honeymoon phase wears off and you really start seeing the gaps and the cracks and all of the stuff, when that happens, like, oh, okay, maybe that trust is reduced and the enthusiasm is down, and you start kind of seeing other things. So for me, that happened way before the change in the status of the relationship.
But do you feel that your dissolution of trust impacted your willingness to dare I say, like toe the line or get in line with the new changes they were implementing?
Oh, 100%. Completely. Because it was just constantly, it was just a constant. Like the only thing you could count on was that something was going to change. And so knowing that, okay, I can't trust that I'm even going to stay in the same location. Like I moved offices 4 times in 1 year.
Yeah, I remember. That was
stupid.
way stupid.
That was way stupid. Like commuting from one side of town that was like 10 minutes away to the house, then being like, no, we need to move to Henderson. Moving from Henderson to a different spot in Henderson, on the same area, but it was still physical moves. And then being like, no, we actually need you downtown. And I was like, what is going on here? It's getting whiplash.
I think, that's a really good example of how having little to no faith in leadership can cause us to resist change. But I also think that there's other reasons. I hear this a lot in my work, which is, there is no precedence. So we've always done it this way, Melissa. Like, I don't understand why things need to change. And I think that, again, coming back to that fear, right? Okay, well, how is this going to impact me?
Well, so let me ask you this, though, because when you're doing it, right, and you're doing it in your appreciative inquiry work, you are John. You're the outside person coming into the organization.
No.
No?
So basically what I do is I don't come in and I don't disseminate information. What I do is my role is to facilitate conversation. So by bringing everyone into the room, let's create a space where we can talk about all the changes that are happening, talk about how this will impact you and how might we come together, like let's say in John's case, right? If I'm being acquired by an organization, how is this going to impact my role? By bringing people from the old organization and the new organization and providing them the space to come together to define what is our new shared vision and how can we come together using our strengths to kind of live out this together and actually just it just creates dialogue. So it's not either me or them, it's us. It's a we mentality.
And I get that. So consulting's a little different, right? Like you go in, you see the things. So, but with what you're doing though, you are helping facilitate this conversation. I have to imagine that there's still people who show up in the room who are like, well, who's this person trying to facilitate my conversation?
Yes and no. I mean, I think it's easier to make me the enemy because, but I've learned through the hard way that not to take it personally. But at the end of the day, that individual just wants to be heard. So they might be standoffish at first, but I can guarantee that towards the end of whatever session I'm facilitating, they're participating in whatever capacity feels comfortable for them. So I think that's important.
What do you think helps with that, though? Getting them to that place of actually from that resistance to even be open to it, or are people already predisposed to be open to it because they've contacted your organization?
No, because I think, in appreciative inquiry, it's all about the flip. And what I mean by the flip is, instead of looking at the negative, we're looking at the positive. But, some people, without even really understanding what appreciative inquiry is, will just assume that we're ignoring all of the negatives. We're not even going to talk about it. But that's not true. What we do is we provide the space for people to discuss what isn't working. And now that they've almost not kind of gotten it out of their system, but, that they've aired their grievances. Okay, we hear you. Now, what would the positive opposite look like? So it allows them to participate in the conversation and also to come up with a solution because, you probably heard your parents say this all the time, stop coming to me with problems, come to me with, some solutions.
Those might have been good parents. No. Parents didn't do shit.
They just feel involved in the process and they don't feel excluded because now they're in the room where the decisions are being made. And I think that that's a very important factor. But when you're coming in, though, coming back to the topic of lack of trust, when it hasn't been done before, I think a lot of people are weary. And I always tell people that, when I hear like, well, we've always done it this way, I understand. And organizations and institutions are perfectly designed to deliver what it's set up to do. And what I mean by that is, the processes, the policies, the procedures that are in place will deliver what it's set out to do. However, as we all know, things happen like the pandemic, and all this stuff, and we have to quickly adapt. So what worked well in the past may not work well now. And that goes on in an individual level too. I mean, we talk about that all the time. Does this mentality serve me? And if it doesn't, then it requires change. And so again, bringing or providing the space that will invite dialogue, invite conversation and shared meaning, I think has been a very powerful tool that I've seen in my work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you did bring up the pandemic, because now I'm just thinking about like the government, right? Like some people trust it, but I feel like there's a lot of mistrust there, right? And so when the government is asking us to do certain things like wear masks and get vaccinated, there's a lot of mistrust here. And it is something that needs to happen in order for the change to happen for the collective of being more comfortable in spaces, being able to have more travel if that's what we're looking for. But it's a low vibe. Like there is no trust there.
Well, that's a very good example, because I think that the reason why people don't necessarily trust what the government says is because the CDC, which brings out these guidelines of social distancing, washing your hands, went back and forth and about what was safe and what wasn't, and you almost couldn't rely on the information. And over time, I think that perception just dwindled next to nothing, and people are like, well, screw the CDC, they have no clue what they're talking about anyways. I've been washing my hands, or I'm not wearing a mask out and I'm fine, I'm not sick.
I'm just wondering what the comparison is with like places where COVID has been eliminated, or COVID barely showing up, like the island of Taiwan. Like there are places where maybe they do trust in their leaders a bit more and have been able to get in line basically and make sure that they're doing things to help with this global issue. But I do want to take it back to talking about that mistrust in the South, because I'm wondering where that lives. Is it part of like limiting beliefs, do you think, or is it part of just that limited mindset as opposed to being in a growth space? Like, what are your thoughts there?
I think it has to do with trauma. And the reason why I say this is because I was just talking to my counselor, and yesterday I had a session with her, and we were talking about just relationships that I have with different family members. And she's like, well, when you speak to them from like the 12-year-old self. And she's like, but that no longer serves you. Because I think we were talking about, establishing better boundaries and understanding that anytime you establish new boundaries, there's going to be some resistance. But I definitely think that comes from, my goodness, why am I drawing blank?
From trauma?
Yeah, I definitely think that it comes from trauma. What about you?
I think with the self, I could see the trauma angle. I think that in certain aspects would stop you. But I just finished reading this phenomenal book, just like absolutely blew me away, called The Big Leap. And part of what the author talks about in that is that there's basically 4 different upper limiting beliefs that stop you from doing things. And so as I'm thinking about this mistrust, one of the upper beliefs that he has is that that basically you're a burden, or that and the second one is, I'm not going to talk about all of them today because it's fascinating. I'll talk to you in person about all of them, or we'll do something else separate on there. But this idea of either you're a burden, and so because you believe you're a burden, you don't trust in your ability to grow and do more, or the other one where you don't trust in the idea that things can go well for a very long period of time. And because you have that mistrust of, oh no, like this shoe, when's the other shoe going to drop? You immediately start catastrophizing. You immediately start finding all of the things that are wrong, trying to worry. And he just talked about it. He's like, I've been happy and haven't had a fight with my wife in 20 years. And people are like, how is that possible? Isn't that boring? He's like, that's like saying, what do you mean? You can't have peace? We need to have war every now and then. And I was like, no, that's not at all how that works. But it's just having that trust in that things actually can go okay, and that things can go okay for a long period of time. I think that's where a lot of people, myself included, will have difficulties in trusting in the good. Like, we're so easy to trust in the bad stuff and be like, oh, well, yeah, when it rains, it pours, and just start seeing your whole day kind of go down. But we're much more resistant to being like, hey, you know what? This has been good. Like I had a really good work week. Things have been going well. And then you're just feeling like, okay, what's going to happen?
Does it make you uncomfortable when you're sitting in that space when you're waiting for the other shoe to drop?
It has before. And I think what it does is it diminishes the joy that you allow yourself to have. And so I think that that's really the risk of having that mistrust in the ability to have joy for a long period of time or to feel fulfillment for a long period of time. And I do think there are people out there who are doing it. And I would certainly like to count myself in those people at some point one day. But I certainly know that it's a process and it's a journey of trusting that, hey, when good things happen, that doesn't mean that it's going to be followed by something bad. So do you suffer from that belief that, hey, things are going good, so something's got to go bad?
I think I used to. I haven't in a really long time. And I think that that just comes from growth and understanding that I firmly believe, and I don't really believe in like necessarily like crystals and stuff like that, but I do believe in karma. And I do believe that what you put out, like I believe in energy, I do believe that what you put out will come back to you. So, and I don't think we've ever really talked about toxic positivity, but you cannot be positive all the time. Things are not going to be, all sunshine and rainbows. It's just not possible. We're human. Life happens. But understanding that what you are feeling, whether it's distrust, dissatisfaction, is so momentary, and that there are things that you can do to kind of get yourself out of it. Whether that's, in your case, you started your own law practice, whether that's leaving a relationship. I mean, whatever it is, there are things that can be done. So it's only a temporary discomfort, not a, forever thing.
That's true. And so even with the mistrust, right, being in that space, that I don't think that space feels good. And that doesn't feel good. Like if you're feeling that energy when you walk into a place and you're like, oh yeah, and like, I don't trust the vibe here, whatever it is, you sense that. And so, having that mistrust can make it difficult for you to change, but you also have the ability to get yourself out of that. So that way you're not feeling like, oh, I'm in a space that I can't trust, or I have a lack of trust in these spaces. Like, well, what does it serve you to be in a relationship, and romantic, platonic, like all of the above, with people that you don't trust, like constantly needing to be on your guard, watching out for things like, yeah, of course. Why would you want to grow in that space? That makes no sense. So I understand why people would be resistant to change when there's mistrust, but you have the opportunity, dear listener, to change that space for yourself.
And I think it's important to note that when you're in a situation, you're like, okay, what's going on? Do I distrust this person or distrust this situation? According to Rachel Botsman, a lecturer at Oxford University, distrust actually goes through 3 behavioral stages. The first is defensiveness. You're quick to anger, you're quick to defend your work, whatever it is. The second is disengagement. You're starting to remove yourself from projects or from conversations with that person. And then the second one is just disenchantment. You are no longer believe in the value of anything that they're saying or that individual. So if you find yourself going through these stages, there's a good indication that you lack trust for that individual or that environment.
That's really good way to just break that down, right? Because if you're having, defensive qualities or other things, or you're disengaging and getting to that level of disenchantment, like at that point, it's funny. At that point, doesn't something have to change?
I would think so. I mean, it did for you, did it not?
Yeah. I mean, there were a couple of different things, right? But it's like, if you're in this space, I find it difficult to believe that something isn't going to change. Are you going to stay forever in this disenchantment? You're going to figure out a way to make that change. So even if you're resisting towards it, it's just a matter of how long do you want to be in these stages? How long do you want to be constantly going into battle? And that's a choice. You can do that for a day. You can do that for 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, 20, whatever it is, you're still making a choice of being in that space. And so if you're listening to us and to this podcast, it's because you probably do want to make a change, and you probably want to say, hey, you know what? Maybe this is an opportunity for me. And just recognizing that awareness of, hey, I'm in any of these stages, I think would really just help anybody realize, hey, this is something indicating that there's mistrust. Something's got to give, and hopefully give yourself that opportunity to, move on. We want to hear from you. Is there an area of your life or relationship where you are experiencing a lack of trust? Let us know on our Instagram, Pivotal Moments HQ. We want to thank our producer and music director, Ron Johnson. This has been an Astronomicus DMR production. Thank you for listening, and remember, it's never too late